The Xbox One controller definitely has the reputation of being one of the most comfortable go-to controllers on the market, but Microsoft and Xbox hasn't always had the reputation of having the greatest controllers in the world, and they've had quite the journey of evolving their controllers over the years. So today on Rocket Sloth, we decided to take a look back at the evolution of the Xbox controller. Let's get into it. To start things off, back when the Xbox originally released in 2001, Microsoft had many different prototypes as to which controller they wanted to use to market their new console and what controller people would use out of the gate when they first started playing on their new Xbox. Remember, this was a really important time for Microsoft because they were trying to introduce a console into an already saturated market, as Nintendo had the GameCube, Sony had the PlayStation 2, and Sega had already released a Dreamcast. And on top of that, each had their own unique controller. So while Microsoft was trying to launch their debut into console gaming, they definitely had to advertise their system as something different and not necessarily do what everyone else was doing, and maybe that's why we got the first Xbox controller that we had. Commonly referred to as the Duke, this was an oversized Xbox controller that had the typical ABXY buttons along with a black and white button, and overall, this controller was very large. This controller also had dual vibration motors in the controller, and it had analog triggers and sticks, which was kind of nice for immersive gameplay, especially in things like Halo. However, in Japan, the Xbox actually launched with a different controller known as the Xbox S controller, and this controller was pretty much the same thing except much smaller to fit into smaller players' hands. Both versions of the controllers also had memory slots in the back of the controller, so you could plug in an 8 megabyte solid state card in case you were trying to transfer data from one game to another, or you're going to see a friend or something and you wanted to bring one of your saves with you. However, upon the launch of the original Xbox, the controller was actually criticized pretty heavily across different media outlets. Honestly, this was a time when Xbox was kind of competing directly with the PlayStation 2's DualShock 2, which was an awesome controller, and the clunky large feeling of the Duke just didn't really sit well with consumers as well as maybe Microsoft initially planned out. Still, there are large communities today that actually really did love this controller. It was unique and it fit into some players' hands really well. However, with Xbox trying to reach an appeal of large audiences, including smaller kids with smaller hands, they decided to update the controller to the Controller S model that they had launched in Japan as kind of the standard just a year after the Xbox's launch. Still, if you were a fan of the Duke, you could still buy it individually on its own, and there's still people today that claim the Duke was the ultimate Xbox controller of all time. When it was time for the Xbox 360 to release, Microsoft put more work into refining the controller and actually produced a really great controller with the Xbox 360 controller. Sticking mostly to the design of the smaller Xbox S controller, they decided to move the black and white buttons to the bumpers to make converting from a PlayStation controller to an Xbox 360 controller a little bit easier. And with the huge success that Xbox Live was on the original console, especially with games like Halo 2, they added an Xbox dashboard button to the middle of the controller, which easily brought up menus where you could access your friends list, party chat, and just kind of navigate the system a lot easier. The dashboard button also had 4 LED lights inside of it that would indicate which player you were on the controller. So if you were playing with multiple people, you could figure out easily just by looking at the controller if it was player 1, player 2, player 3, or player 4. Also, since this controller made the jump to wireless, you could use AA batteries to power up your controller or buy a rechargeable pack, and there was a port on the top side of the controller that allowed you to plug your Xbox into any USB port. This also worked on computers, so if you're running emulation or you're running a computer game that had controller support, the Xbox 360 was often deemed as one of the go-to controllers if you were trying to play on PC. Along with some of the visual adjustments to the controller, they also added a port on the bottom, which added in an easy spot for microphones and headsets to be plugged in, so more people were kind of on board with the game chat system right out of the box. It was really easy to set up, and all Xboxes came with headsets, so people were trash talking from day one. Of course, the base set controllers came in the classic white color that matched the way the Xbox 360s looked, but over the years, different types of redesigns and special edition controllers had come out that were in different colors. In late 2010, the Xbox 360 controller actually saw a new redesign that just changed a couple of smaller aspects on the controller. The analog sticks shifted from a typical 4-point concave design into a similar spiral concave design, and really the only other major shift was that they added an adjustable D-pad where you could twist your D-pad on your controller to either have kind of an 8-point circle configuration or just a strict 4-point D-pad setup. This was to better adjust to whatever game players were playing. In games like Call of Duty, where D-pads are more used for calling in certain types of things or used for menus, the 4-point version worked out well, but in other games where you might want to use the D-pad for some sort of navigation, having it more in the circle form worked out a little bit better. And also during this change, they replaced the Xbox logo from the kind of regular silverish color to a more reflective mirror-like silver color. So you can tell which controller you have based off of what type of material the logo is made out of. During the development of the Xbox One, Microsoft invested $100 million into redesigning the Xbox controller for this next generation. The one key factor in the Xbox One's success is the fact that they kind of built upon it or redesigned the controller based off of the 360's success and made something that was more ergonomic but still similar to how the 360 was set up. Most specifically noticeable is the fact that the triggers and bumpers were kind of reshaped a little bit to better fit in line with a player's finger, and it definitely feels more comfortable than the Xbox 360 counterparts. Also, they added in more vibration sensors into the triggers so that you could feel responses on different sections of the controller, and the Xbox dashboard button was actually moved to the top of the controller in this upper bar section. However, it looked kind of weird at first to a lot of people who were used to 360 controller, but it actually worked out pretty well because it did allow for extra room for the bumpers. These controllers were still wireless, running on batteries, or you could get a rechargeable battery if you chose to, but now the Xbox One controllers had micro USB support, which was way more accessible than what the 360 had, so finding a cord to charge your controller was way easier than it used to be. And then the bottom of the controller also had a new port set up for headsets which utilized some sort of offshoot version of USB, which was kind of an unpopular choice just because it didn't allow players to pick between any headset they had. They really were forced to use any type of Xbox approved USB headset that worked with the controller. Fortunately, 2 years after the launch, they did a slight redesign to the controller, which added an auxiliary cable to the bottom port, allowing players to use any type of line-in headset or headphones that they have. And they also made a slight adjustment to the bumpers, making it just a little bit more comfortable for players. Also in 2015, they launched the new Xbox One Elite controller, which was more intended for hardcore gamers and professional gamers, which had interchangeable thumbsticks, a D-pad that could also be changed out, along with detachable paddles that would go under your controller, just in case you wanted to remap a certain button to a more accessible section. It also had a rubberized grip, which felt a lot better to hold than just the more smooth grip on the older Xbox One controllers. And then finally in 2016, they put out another revision of the regular Xbox One controller, which essentially added Bluetooth functionality, which kind of shows Microsoft's earliest intentions to be more accessible to gamers on other platforms, specifically with the huge push that Microsoft's been making for PC, and the fact that we know that in the next generation, Xbox is going to be on more than just one console. For instance, the newer Xbox controller can actually work with Android devices and can play games like Minecraft directly with the controller. Also with that, they added a new texture design to the back of the controller, which definitely makes holding onto the controller for long periods of time more comfortable than the first Xbox One controllers that came with the system or the first revision. And while the Xbox One controller is definitely one of the most popular controllers on the marketplace right now, just because of how great it feels to use and hold onto, it still does have some criticisms in the community. Most notably, the fact that the Xbox One controller is still relatively fragile, especially compared to the Xbox 360 controller. There are so many times that I know that I've dropped my 360 controller and just picked it up again and it worked fine, where on the Xbox One, a lot of players players, and myself included, have had broken controllers from just a really short drop and bumpers that can easily be jammed. Of course, they did do the redesign that made the bumper a little bit better and less likely to jam, but it's still really frustrating to have to go through controllers if you're not careful or you are kind of reckless with it. I mean, accidents happen, but it was really nice how sturdy those Xbox 360 controllers originally were. Moving forward, Microsoft also released the new Xbox One adaptive controller, which is a really cool function that allows for players who have disabilities to completely remap their controller in a way that best works with them. For a really long time, the disabled community has had to spend a ton of money buying special controllers just to play basic games, and the introduction of the Xbox One adaptive controller has been really cool because it just allows players to easily pick out what they need to play the games that everyone loves. And you can also tie that with the Xbox co-piloting system, and it's just a really cool feature that they've added that allows way more people to play some awesome games. Of course, over the years, Microsoft has released other types of accessories and things to try out if you wanted to use different types of controllers, like the Kinect, that didn't work really well. And we actually did a whole video on the worst Xbox accessories you can check out. But what we really like to know is, which Xbox controller do you guys think was the best Xbox controller of all time? Personally, I really like the Xbox One controller, especially the newest one with the textured back. However, the 360 controller still stands true for me just because I was able to just use one 360 controller through my whole life on the Xbox 360, and for the Xbox One, I've had to buy multiple controllers over the years. As far as the future of the Xbox is concerned, with them making a huge push for their next generation of systems and the fact that they're going to be introducing a new streaming system, we're likely to see a more definitive Xbox controller that's going to work on all types of platforms, especially with the Bluetooth enabled. And to put that even further, they're definitely going to have to work on something to keep the latency down if they're going to be streaming games and really have some high-tech Bluetooth technology in the controllers. We're also going to see touch controls in tablets and phones for players who don't have controllers easily accessible that still want to play Xbox games. It'll be interesting to see how those controls respond when you're playing on the go. But let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you like these types of videos, be sure to subscribe with notifications on, and we'll see you all next time with a brand new video.